Why would someone risk everything, family, career, freedom, to chase the fleeting power of life and death moments that they create? That's what we're going to find out in this disturbing case. The autumn leaves clung to the oaks, lining the quad at Bridgewater State College, their fiery reds and golds cutting through the gray haze of early September 1986. An 18-year-old with blonde hair, swept into a tight ponytail, stepped off the bus, her backpack slung over one shoulder, and the stethoscope charm glinting in her keychain like a promise. Fall River's weary mill streets and her parents' neat suburban home felt like a discarded skin now. Here, in the sprawling commuter campus south of Boston, she was carving out a new self, shedding the role of eldest daughter, the one who balanced her sister's shadow and her father's quiet ambitions, to become a pre-med hopeful, chasing the pulse of a bigger life. She threw herself into the rhythm of freshman year with calculated fervor, navigating the science-building sterile halls where fluorescent lights buzzed and formaldehyde's sharp bite lingered from the biolabs. Mornings found her at the front of anatomy class, notebook open to sketches of veins and muscle fibers, her pen a blur as Professor Harlan lectured on nerve pathways. She was the one who fired off precise questions, the kind that made classmates fidget and the professor nod, muttering about her scalpel-sharp mind. Her smile came quick, disarming, but it masked a quiet tally of who noticed, who approved. She wasn't a loner, not quite. She gathered people like tokens, orbiting a small crew of nursing track girls in Tutter Hall. There was a coffee-stained dreamer from Quincy, always spinning patient case scenarios, and a psych major with a nicotine habit, chasing Freudian insights over greasy pizza runs. They'd sprawled on the dorm's worn couches, swapping stories of high school crushes and a cute lab partner. She was the spark, leading in with eyes open, weaving tales of her summer clinic job. Mundane bandage changes spun into high-stakes heroics that left her friends gasping. His face when the IV blew, she'd whisper, fingers mimicking a syringe's plunge, her voice low like she was sharing a secret. They laughed, hooked by her intensity, though the Quincy girl once muttered to the psych major that the stories felt too slick, like lines rehearsed for a stage. Still, they stayed, drawn to the way that she made late nights crackle with life. What she did most was observe. In the nursing simulation lab, a dim basement with mannequins splayed with gurneys and silent casualties, she lingered past class, gloved hand tracing the rubber veins of a practice arm, pushing saline until it glistened at the elbow's crease. That was her haven. The power of a needle, the way it could mimic life's thrum or snuff it out under the cold glow of the lights. It wasn't the textbooks or the ethics debates that lit her up. It was the control, the heartbeat she could steer. She'd volunteer for every mock code, snapping orders at her stumbling group as the dummy's chest heaved under her compressions, her face glowing with something beyond focus, a hunger for the moment's wait. Anatomy, though, was her nemesis. The class loomed over Tuesdays and Thursdays, a grueling slog in a lab thick with chemical reek of embalming fluid that clung to her jeans. She hated the chaos of dissection, the scalpel's drag through the stubborn tissue, the way flesh resisted exposing raw chambers she couldn't reorder. It's like breaking a puzzle you didn't ask for, she grumbled one rainy afternoon in the cafeteria, picking at a sloggy turkey sub while the psych major nodded absently. The group work chaffed the most. Teammates who fumbled cuts, botching ephemeral arteries she'd memorized. Her voice would sharpen then, slow and biting. If you can't commit, why start? Her classmates swapped looks, unsure of her edge with passion or a blade turned outward. By spring, the seams started to fray. A lanky engineering major from her dorm floor, with an easy grin and late-night study sessions, became her anchor. Their talks in the library stacks, surrounded by the musty scent of old books, turned to kisses stolen in the dorm's common room, the jukebox humming Springsteen in the background. She poured herself into him, spinning plans for summer drives to Cape Cod, her vulnerability a hook to keep him close. But when he pulled away, first midterms, then excuses, then a soft "it's not working" scrawled on a note slipped under her door, the unraveling hit hard. In April 1987, after his silence grew heavy, she swallowed a handful of aspirin in the student union bathroom. A deliberate gesture not meant to kill, but to scream for attention. She left a scrawled note on lined paper by the sink addressed to him. "Can't do this alone. Please." The RA found her slumped by the mirror, pale but composed, vomit flecking her sneakers. Campus security rushed her to the hospital, sirens silencing the quiet quad as the Quincy girl and the psych major lingered outside the psych ward, whispering about attention grabs. The college mandated counseling, weekly sessions in cramped office with a therapist who poked at her stories like loose stitches. "What's really at stake?" he had asked, and she had countered with tears, then charm, skating through with a nod of progress. But she loathed the exposure, the way it stripped her bare, revealing the gears grinding beneath, her need to pull people in, then test how far they had run to catch her. The engineering major visited once, stiff in the hospital's sterile waiting room, offering apologies before fading for good. Her crew thinned out too. The Quincy girl dropped off a care package, but the psych major drifted, muttering about heavy vibes. She finished the semester alone, hunched under her desk lamp, transfer forms spread like a map to a new act. Nursing with its clean scrubs and sharp needles became her focus, a stage where she could wield power without the muck of cadavers. By summer, she packed her duffel for another college, the Bridgewater quad blurring in the rear view of her parents' station wagon. The spring's crisis lingered like a scar, a reminder that control slipped when you leaned in too hard. But as the car hummed north, she traced that charm in her palm, already scripting the next scene. Hospital wards, urgent codes, the quiet thrill of a hand that could start or stop a life. It wasn't about fixing the past. It was about owning the pulse of what came next. Welcome. I'm a licensed professional counselor, and I talk about the psychology behind the crimes. Today, we're analyzing a case that's layered with betrayal and a place meant for healing. A nurse so heinous she snuffed out patients like trash. I want to offer a trigger warning here. This case involves murder, medical harm to vulnerable patients, and discussions of mental health struggles, including manipulation and self-harm ideation. Viewer discretion is advised. Without further ado, let's pull back the curtains and unravel this chilling case together. This is the story of Kristen Gilbert. In the dim glow of a late-night shift at a veterans hospital in Northampton, Massachusetts, Kristen Gilbert slipped away from a nurse's station with a syringe in her pocket. This wasn't for routine care. It was something far more calculated, a way to summon chaos that she could then tame, drawing the eyes of a security guard she was secretly involved with. What no one knew then was that this single act, repeated over months, would leave elderly veterans gasping for air, their hearts racing toward silence, all the while the ward buzzed with false urgency of her making. It started with a spike in emergencies on Ward C, where heart alarms blared far too often. In the quiet halls of Northampton Veterans Affairs Medical Center, a place built in 1924 to care for soldiers scarred by war, both in body and mind, something unthinkable was unfolding. The staff saw a dedicated caregiver, quick with a smile and steady in crisis. Someone who seemed to thrive when lives hung in the balance. But beneath the surface, a dark secret was waiting to be uncovered. A secret that would shatter trust in those white coats and force a community to question how vulnerability could be weaponized. This is not just a story of murder. It's a story of deception, woven into daily routines and the investigators and families who piece together the fragments of truth. As someone who spends my days helping people navigate their inner worlds, cases like this hits hard. They remind us how fragile the line between care and control is. Kristen Gilbert was born on November 13, 1967 in Fall River, Massachusetts, a mill town about 50 miles south of Boston. Known for its textile history, but carrying the weight of economic shifts that left families striving for stability. She grew up as the older of two daughters to Richard and Claudia Strickland in what looked like a solid middle-class setup. Her father worked as an executive, bringing home a steady income, while her mother managed the home and taught part-time, offering a mix of structure and warmth. On the surface, their early life seemed steady, the kind of suburban normalcy in Groton where they moved, a small town of rolling hills and the family neighborhoods that fed into good schools. Kristen excelled academically, joining the math club and earning spots on the honor rolls, the picture of a driven girl from a household where achievement was quietly expected. But even as a young person, there were signs of something off-kilter, subtle threads that hindsight would pull apart. For example, by her teenage years, those close to her started noticing a pattern of stretching the truth, small lies that grew into habits, like claiming illnesses to skip obligations or embellishing stories to hold the spotlight. Friends recalled moments where she would fabricate crisis, once staging a dramatic faint at a school event, drawing concern and attention that faded as quickly as it flared. These weren't just youthful pranks. They hinted at a deeper need to shape how others saw her, to control the narrative around her world. This is where we see those classic signs that we often talk about in true crime. Patterns like compulsive dishonesty or a pull toward high-stakes scenarios that mimic emotional turmoil. In my work as a counselor, I've seen how these can stem from early insecurities. Perhaps the pressure of being the eldest in a family where success was a silent currency, or unspoken tensions in a home that prized appearances. Experts reviewing her case later pointed to traits aligning to borderline personality features, marked by intense relationships and the fear of abandonment, alongside antisocial tendencies that dismiss others' pain for personal gain. No formal diagnosis was ever pinned down in court records, but the speculation circles around how untreated emotional voids can fester into manipulative cycles. But here's the thing. No real intervention came her way back then. School counselors noted the behaviors, but in an era before mental health was as front and center as it is now, they were chalked up to teenage drama. Her parents mostly focused on providing, likely missed the cues, or chose not to dwell in a community where admitting cracks in a family facade wasn't the norm. This blend of overlooked nurture, gaps into innate wiring laid the groundwork, turning potential vulnerabilities into a blueprint for later deceptions. Let's pause here and think about the broader picture in places like the regional high school where Kristen graduated in 1985. It was a tight-knit spot feeding into colleges like Bridgewater State, where she headed next for their nursing studies. Northampton itself, with its artsy vibe and proximity to the Connecticut River, drew young professionals seeking purpose. Nursing fit that bill, a calling to heal the very veterans who had served in conflicts like Vietnam, which loomed large in the 1990s psyche. But for Kristen, entering that field might have amplified unresolved needs, a space where life and death stakes could feed an emerging thrill for control. As she navigated college, those early signs didn't vanish. If anything, they sharpened. At Bridgewater State College, she enrolled in 1986, drawn to the pre-med tracks that promised impact. Yet midway through, a boyfriend breakup triggered what school officials called a suicide gesture. Not a full attempt, but enough to alarm, leading to mandatory counseling sessions. She told stories of self-harm ideation to pull him back, a manipulation move that echoed her teen years, blending vulnerability with calculation. The college stepped in, requiring psychiatric evaluation, but records show she completed it minimally. Emerging with a nursing degree in 1988, her surface polished intact. Her family's dynamic played into this as well. Richard's executive role meant absences. Claudia's teaching kept her engaged elsewhere, leaving Kristen as the reliable eldest, perhaps internalizing a role of emotional caretaker too soon. In counseling terms, this could foster attachment issues, where bonds feel conditional, pushing someone toward extreme measures to secure them. No overt trauma surfaced in public records, no abuse, no loss documented, but with the quiet pressure of perfection changing in America, with women's roles evolving, might have sown seeds of resentment or unmet needs. By her early 20s, Kristen met Glenn Gilbert at a beach outing in New Hampshire, a fellow nurse with a calm demeanor that contrasted her intensity. They married quickly in 1988, settling into a routine that looked perfect. Dual incomes, a home in the leafy suburbs of Florence, Massachusetts, near Northampton, where young families built lives around soccer fields and community barbecues. Glenn later described her as affectionate at first, the partner who planned date nights and dreamed of kids, but cracks appeared in private. Arguments where she'd lash out, then reel him in with apologies laced with tears. Their first son arrived in 1990, a boy they named after family ties, followed by a second in 1993, turning their household into a snapshot of 1990s domestic charm. Kristen balanced shifts at the VA with PTA meetings, her blonde bob with warm laugh making her the go-to mom at school events. Yet whispers from the neighbors hinted at volatility. Tires slashed on ex-friends' cars after arguments or sudden rages over minor slights. From a mental health lens, this phase screams compartmentalization, a skill where one splits the good self from the shadowed one. In sessions with clients, I see it often, the high achiever who charms at work but unravels at home, driven by fears of rejection that trace back to those unchecked teen patterns. For Kristen, nursing offered an outlet, caring for veterans, many battling PTSD from wars past, and a facility like the Northampton VA, which had evolved from its 1920s neuropsychiatric roots to a full-service hub by the 1990s, serving over 120,000 in Western Mass. The center's history adds layers. Built on 286 acres, originally for mental health recovery post-World War I, it symbolized national gratitude to vets, with wards like C dedicated to chronic care for the elderly and infirm, and staffed by locals proud of their service ethos. It fostered a family-like bond among employees, potlucks and holiday drives, but also isolation, with night shifts stretching into the lonely hours. Kristen thrived there initially, rated highly skillful in reviews, her quick responses to codes earning nods from supervisors. But those early flags? They lingered. Subtle indicators like her fascination with emergencies, not as a fear, but as fuel. Colleagues joked lightly about her luck with crisis, unaware it foreshadowed a deeper pull toward the power of revival, and its flip side, the finality of failure. In psychological terms, this could tie into sensation-seeking, a trait where boredom breeds risk, amplified by borderline-like instability that craves intense connections. Her sister's life, quieter and out of the spotlight, highlights this divergence. Same home, different paths, suggesting Kristen's wiring or subtle family roles amplified her traits. No rivalry documented, but as the elder, she might have shouldered the unspoken expectations, fostering a resentment that simmered. By 1995, with 2 toddlers and a marriage showing strain, the stage was set. Not for explosion, but for erosion, where home stresses bled into work and vice versa. In Northampton's community, a blend of college town progressives and blue-collar vets' trust in institutions like the VA ran deep. Scandals felt distant. Yet, for Kristen, this environment, supportive yet demanding, mirrored her inner split, a place to project competence while hiding the churn beneath. As Kristen grew older, her life took a turn toward the complexities of adult roles, blending domestic demands with professional pressures in a way that strained her carefully built image. She and Glenn welcomed their second son in 1993, settling into a split-level home in Florence, where weekends meant Little League games and backyard cookouts with neighbors who envied their picture-perfect setup. To the outside world, she appeared capable, the mom who volunteered for bake sales and the nurse whose shifts ended with grateful patients' thanks. But behind closed doors, the strains mounted. Glenn later testified to mood swings that swung from doting to distant. Nights where Kristen would withdraw into silence or erupt over forgotten chores, leaving him walking on eggshells. For instance, by 1994, arguments escalated. She accused him of neglect amid her long hours, then countered with gestures like surprise picnics, pulling him back into the fold. Family friends noticed the push-pull, but attributed it to the new parent fatigue in an era when work-life balance wasn't yet a buzzword. And this is where things get really twisted. Kristen was living a double life, one of suburban stability by day and a shadowed pursuit of intensity by night at the VA. She managed to keep these worlds separate, using meticulous scheduling, daycare pickups timed to perfection, alibis of overtime for late arrivals to dodge questions. But the cracks were starting to show. Like the way she'd linger after shifts, eyes scanning for James Perot, a security guard 10 years her junior, with a boyish charm that caught her during a routine patrol overlap in late 1994. Their connection sparked subtly. Shared cigarettes in the parking lot, whispers about hospital gossip that turned personal. By early 1995, it had ignited into a full-fledged affair. Stolen moments in empty on-call rooms where the thrill of secrecy amplified every touch. Perot, fresh from military service, saw her as vibrant. A break from his routine patrols, she in turn confided tales of marital woes, claims of Glenn's abuse that he flatly denied in court, painting her as the instigator of conflicts. This bond wasn't just physical, it fed her need for validation, a psychological anchor of the chaos of motherhood and midnight meds. In counseling practice, I often explore how affairs like this signal deeper voids, perhaps abandonment fears rooted in those teen lies where intimacy feels safest when illicit, promising escape without full commitment. For Kristen, it intertwined with work. Perot's role meant he had rushed to codes, and soon her shift saw more of them, as if her presence alone summoned alarms. Colleagues remarked on her poise during a medical crisis, but privately, she'd confide to Perot about the rush, the word that carried double meaning, exhilaration from saving or sparking the need. Her home life frayed further. By mid-1995, Glenn suspected something, leading to denials laced with tears, and she would retaliate subtly, tampering with his car brakes once, a scare he dismissed as a mechanical failure, or slipping sedatives into his coffee to induce fatigue, blaming stress. These acts, pieced together in trial testimony, revealed a pattern of retaliation, where perceived slights triggered sabotage. Hallmarks of antisocial traits blended with emotional dysregulation. At the VA, the hospital's 1990s evolution added fuel. Post-Gulf War, patient loads swell with aging Vietnam vets, many on Ward C for chronic issues like heart disease and dementia. Vulnerable souls reliant on staff like Kristen. The facility with its sprawling 105-acre campus by then shrunk from original wartime sprawl, housed 85 behavioral beds, fostering a culture of overtime and understaffing that blurred boundaries. Nurses bonded over coffee, sharing war stories from patients, but Kristen's tales veered dramatic, exaggerating crises to bond with Perot. The double life peaked in the fall of 1995. By day, PTA meetings in Florence's community center, where she would coordinate and organize fundraisers with quiet efficiency, and by night, rendezvous with Perot. Their affair heating as she began engineering small disruptions, fiddling with monitors to mimic irregularities, testing the waters of control. Psychologically, this escalation mirrors thrill-seeking escalation, where the dopamine from the near misses reinforces the behavior, much like addiction cycles I counsel clients through. Glenn's perspective adds depth here. In interviews post-trial, he described confusion turning to dread, piecing together her absences with hospital calls about emergencies. The community, tight in Western Mass, Northampton's farm stands and art festivals masking underlying economic strains from mill closures, saw the Gilberts as stable, but whispers grew. Her sister's view, though private, likely echoed family shock. The younger sibling watching from afar as Kristen's orbit pulled in chaos. Perot's role deepened the split. He began confident, unaware initially of her manipulations, but drawn to her intensity. Their dynamic, her as a mentor and him as an admirer, fed narcissistic undercurrents where she orchestrated scenarios to shine. like responding to a code she indirectly triggered, earning his all. In mental health terms, this screams of histrionic elements, craving drama to affirm worth, intertwined with betrayal sting when Glenn pushed back. By late 1995, the tactics sharpened. She pocketed extra supplies, justified long breaks with patient checks that didn't exist. Home tensions boiled. A 1995 incident where she allegedly injected Glenn with a sedative during a blood draw argument, leaving him woozy, which he later tied to her VA access. He sought counseling quietly, but stayed for the kids, a decision born of love mixed with denial. The Northampton backdrop enriched this, a progressive pocket amid conservative vet enclaves where VA staff mingled at local pubs like the Roost, swapping shifts over beers. Kristen fit in, her stories of saving lives captivating. But parole noted her fixation on adrenaline tales, the drugs' rush mirroring her own highs. This phase, from a fair spark to subtle sabotages, built a web where personal betrayals fueled personal risk, her psyche fracturing under the weight of sustaining both. From victims' families' later accounts, the ward felt off. More beeps, more rushes, but staff normalized it, overworked in a system strained by the 1990s healthcare reforms. Kristen's escalation wasn't overnight. It was a slow burn. Her double life, a tightrope where one slip could expose all. By the fall of 1995, Kristen had crossed the line from subtle disruptions to deliberate harm. Her actions unfolding in the controlled quiet of Ward C at Northampton VA. Her crimes began with targeted injections of epinephrine, a clear, odorous heart stimulant stocked for emergencies but lethal in overdose, causing arrhythmias that mimic natural cardiac events in steady, frail patients. Her MO was precise. Select isolated veterans during low staff hours, inject IV lines under the guise of routine checks. Then trigger a cold blue she could heroically manage, often with Perot arriving as backup. She targeted elderly men with pre-existing conditions, diabetics, heart patients, who wouldn't arouse suspicion, their deaths blending into the ward stats. Often she'd linger post-injection, monitoring the panic, her calm facade masking the intent. Let's talk about the victims here because their stories matter. These were men who served their country, now seeking solace and care. Their final days stolen by someone sworn to protect. There was Henry, a 66-year-old Korean War vet from Springfield, admitted for chronic lung issues and depression after losing his wife. On November 27, 1995, during Kristen's shift, he went into sudden arrest. She was the first on the scene, calling a code, but efforts failed. His daughter later recalled his gentle humor, how he would share war postcards with grandkids, a man who had rebuilt after battles in freezing hills. Then there was Kenneth, 41, a Gulf War survivor of Southampton itself, battling schizophrenia and physical scars from service. He was young for the ward, admitted for med adjustments after a breakdown. On June 7, 1996, prosecutors tied this to Kristen wanting an early shift in for a parole date. She injected him, his heart seizing mid-conversation about baseball. His widow Nancy spoke in court of their shared dreams cut short, leaving sons grappling with a father's abrupt absence. Questions of why him echoing in family gatherings. Then there was Stanley, a 70-year-old World War II Navy vet from South Handley, frail with emphysema, who trusted nurses like family. November 1995 saw his code during her watch. Exhumed tests found epinephrine traces. His son remembered Stan's garden tales, a quiet provider whose death left plots untended, the family piecing rituals around an empty chair at holidays. And Edward, 69, a Vietnam-era vet with dementia from Pittsburgh, whose confusion made him easy prey. November 21, 1991, injection led to a fatal rhythm. His wife described evenings of his fading stories, now silenced. Their home a shrine of metals gathering dust. Tragically, remains exhumed years later confirmed the poison in 3 cases, the scale staggering. At least 4 confirmed murders, 2 attempts amid suspicions of 40 plus. For the attempts, one diabetic vet overdosed on insulin she tampered with. Another yanked from a vent tube in 1994, both surviving to testify faintly, their fear etching into VA records. These men weren't statistics. Henry sketched birds for therapy. Kenneth coached youth sports pre-illness. Stanley fixed neighbors' radios. And Edward hummed old tunes. Lives of service ended in betrayal. The Northampton community was shaken. A ripple through vet halls and diners where families gathered. Fear spread as whispers of cursed shifts circulated. Wives hesitated drop-offs demanding escorts, while support groups for vet spouses swelled with anxious shares. What made it worse was a systemic flag. VA understaffing from the 1990s budget cuts meant fewer eyes. Initial reports dismissed as bad luck in a high mortality ward, leaving families like Kenneth's feeling gaslit, their grief compounded by doubt. From law enforcement's view, the pattern emerged slowly. 3 nurses flagged the epinephrine shortages in February of 1996, tying 37 deaths to Kristen's 1995 to 96 shifts. The odds? 1 in 100 million, per stats expert. Families pushed petitions, vigils at lead campus, gates drawing local news, forcing VA brass to act amid national healthcare scrutiny. The victim's psyche adds a heartbreak here. Many of them battled PTSD. Their trust in the system, a fragile anchor. Henry's depression deepened isolation. Kenneth's schizophrenia amplified paranoia. In mental health work, I see how such betrayals re-traumatize survivors, carrying the what-if scars. And families navigating a compounded loss. Brief therapy sessions packed with, she was supposed to help. And the ward's vibe shifted. Codes, once routine, now omens. Staff second-guessing meds. The community, a Pioneers Valley's close-knit farms and factories, rallying fundraisers for memorials. But underlying it, a betrayal of the veteran covenant, where healing halls turn hazardous. By early 1996, the investigation was heating up, thanks to a trio of vigilant nurses who broke the silence on the death cluster. Their February report to supervisors igniting federal scrutiny. A critical moment came when the VA police, led by Detective Michael Benston, reviewed shift logs, spotting Kristen's name on half of Ward C's 350 deaths since 1989. A statistical anomaly screaming foul play. For example, a survivor from an attempt, a 37-year-old vet named Richard, described a burning rush post-injection, his survival yielding a timeline matching her rounds. This led investigators to Kristen, who denied everything initially, chalking it up to coincidence in interviews, her charm deflecting early probes. But it wasn't easy. The police faced obstacles like jurisdictional overlaps, VA federal status clashing with local Northampton PD, and there was evidence decay and bodies buried. Toxicology tricky for epinephrine that mimics natural death. Families' pleas added pressure, but bureaucracy slowed warrants, with VA brass wary of a scandal in post-Vietnam trust-eroded era. Still, key figures like U.S. Attorney William Welch refused to give up, coordinating with FBI forensics. A pivotal breakthrough. Perot's flip in summer of 1996 after their affair soured. He confessed pillow talk admissions, I did it for us, and handed over notes. When authorities finally executed a search warrant on her home in February 1996, they uncovered frozen syringes, disguised voice devices for threats, and ledgers tracking codes. Shocking hauls tying her to a November 1995 bomb hoax, retaliating against probe participants. From Perot's lens, regret fueled cooperation. He detailed her boasts like killing to end shifts early, his testimony cracking her alibi. Investigators' persistence shown. Bolkson's team exhumed bodies in 1998, advanced tox screens detecting traces, while stats whiz Dr. Donald Miller calculated the improbability, bolstering probable cause. Community perspective wove in vet advocates like the VFW Post leaders lobbied Congress, their letters amplifying media like the Boston Globe expose, turning whispers to uproar. Families, from Henry's daughter organizing vet walks to Edward's wife joining support necks, humanized the push, their resolve mirroring the soldiers' once. But challenges mounted. Kristen's 7 psych check-ins post-firing in 1996 muddled motives, her lawyers claiming stress, but feds pierced it with wiretaps of her harassment calls to parole. By indictment in June 1998, 4 murders and 3 attempts, the web closed. Her arrest at home with kids in tow, a gut punch to Florence neighbors. Law enforcement's grind, nights pouring logs, interviews with 70 witnesses, exposed VA flaws, lax inventory, ignored flags. Breakthroughs like DNA on vials, hers via prints, and parole's logs sealed it. A testament to dogged work in a system slow to suspect its own. In spring 2001, Kristen Gilbert's world came crashing down. After a 4-month federal trial in Springfield starting October 2000, a jury convicted her on March 14th of 3 first-degree murders, 1 second-degree, and 2 attempts. Her calm facade cracking as verdicts echoed. Sentencing followed swiftly. Life without parole, 4 consecutive terms handed down, sparing death despite federal eligibility. Jurors swayed by her family's pleas, opting for incarceration over execution. This brought a mix of relief and raw anger to the victims' families. Kenneth's wife called it justice, but hollow, hugging sons amid tears, while Hendry's family lit candles at a VA visual. Closure bittersweet without full victim count, but it didn't answer everything. Suspicions linger of 40 to 60 more deaths, unidentified. Her partial confessions to parole hinting at a wider scope, some cases buried in stats. The case left a lasting mark on Northampton and the VA system. Families like Edwards finally got memorials, plaques at the Leeds campus etched with names, annual remembrances drawing vets in solidarity. Kenneth's family channeled grief into advocacy. Jeff founding a vet mental health nonprofit in Kenneth's name, aiding PTSD care to prevent isolation like his dad's. Advances in toxicology have helped identify traces in cold cases, but broader, it exposed healthcare vulnerabilities. VA audits post-2001 tightened med logs, training on angel of death signs, influencing national protocols. The community, once insular, now hosts forums on elder abuse. Western Mass papers like the Gazette running series on vet trust restoration. Now I want to turn my focus to the psychological and mental health indicators here. And these are only my speculations, it's not a diagnosis. From a counselor's view, Kristen's path shows deception at its core thread, likely rooted in early attachment disruptions. Those teen lies and staged crises suggest a fear of genuine vulnerability, where fabricating control staves off abandonment pains. Her affair with parole, intertwined with crimes, points to a borderline-like intensity relationships as lifelines. Betrayal's threat triggering harm to bind or punish. Mental health-wise, the thrill in the codes hint at sensation-seeking. Perhaps antisocial overlays dismissing empathy for vets' pain, amplified by nursing's power imbalance. Childhood in a stable but distant home might have bred resentment, untreated into volatile outbursts. A red flag of boundary erosion. Post-arrest psych stays scream decomposition. Self-harm bids for attention mirroring early patterns. For victims, the psyche toll was profound. Trust shattered in healing spaces, compounding service traumas. PTSD flares in survivors. Families' grief laced with YS guilt. Yet, resilience shines. Groups like Kenneth's Foundation foster community, turning loss into legacy. But lingering mysteries, like uncharged attempts, underscore systemic blind spots. But the case reminds us, early intervention and manipulative traits could redirect paths, emphasizing mental health access in high-stress fields like nursing. This case sticks with me because it lays bare how betrayal erodes the safest spaces, like a hospital ward, and the quiet strength in families rebuilding from that rubble. After the crimes and trial, the ripples touched everyone differently. But the threads of resolution weave through. Kristen remains at FMC Carswell in Fort Worth, Texas, a federal medical center for women. Her days in routine lockdown since 2001 transfer. Appeals dropped in 2003 to avoid death penalty risk. No public remorse was noted, but prison programs offer mental health support, though her engagement is unclear. Glenn Gilbert divorced her in 1998 amid the probe, gaining full custody of their sons, now adults in their 30s. They stayed private, reportedly thriving in Massachusetts, one in tech, echoing his grandfather's field, the other in community work. Glenn rebuilt quietly. He remarried, and his reflections in the old interviews focused on healing for the boys, shielding them from media shadows. Kristen's parents, Richard and Claudia, who testified in court tearfully for her mercy, they've aged in seclusion, occasional sightings at family events, their bond strained but enduring. Her sister, the younger Strickland, maintains distance, building her own family in New England, untouched publicly by the fallout. And for victims' families, progress marks closure. Hendry's family holds annual picnics by the Connecticut River, sharing his sketches. Stan's family restored his garden as a vet memorial park in South Hadley, and Edward's wife passed in 2010, but their children advocate for dementia wards, influencing VA designs. Kenneth's family stands out. Nancy, now in her 70s, travels with grandkids, and Jeff's mental health nonprofit foundation raising $500,000 for vet counseling by 2025. The Northampton VA evolved too. Post-scandal audits led to 24/7 med checking. Ethics training is mandatory, and patient loads eased. And community-wide, a 2005 memorial plaque at the campus lists the four, unveiled by families and vets, drawing 200 for readings of service bios, a ritual of remembrance that fosters healing circles. Broader resolution? The case spurred federal laws tightening healthcare oversight, like the 2003 VA Patient Safety Act, cutting similar incidents nationwide. The families found solace in groups like Parents of Murdered Children, their stories and books and docs aiding others, turning personal voids to public good. What do you think about this case? How does someone like Kristen Gilbert hide in plain sight? She was trusted as a nurse, but she snuffed out her patients like trash. Let me know what you think in the comments. I read every single one of them. And if there's a case you want me to cover next, let me know. Thank you for joining me today, and until next time, stay curious, stay safe.